Welcome back to Curse, Code, and Crown, a live play Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition podcast featuring a fully original world and campaign. I am the wizard Cronox, observer of time. Curse, Code, and Crown features our regular voiceover artists and improvisers, Laura Hamstra as the Orc Countess Ida and Princess Gwendolyn, Tyler Hewitt as Makka Deathcap, and Ryan LaPlante as Duncan Danno, alongside our dungeon master, the incredible Tom McGee. So get ready for an adventure including thrills, chills, and hope for a brighter tomorrow. It's time for Curse, Code, and Crown!
Sitting around the fire, Hadrian begins to explain what happened after Gwendolyn fell. Princess, many of us knew that you were trying to make it to safety, and though I myself was held up in the palace itself, not many of us saw what we had assumed then was murder of you, but now seems to only have been the death of your physical self, which, Duncan, I'm sure you can sympathize with, is rather confusing. The Dawnbreakers don't truck much with the mystical arts, and beyond the stone now in your possession, I'm afraid I don't have much of a frame of reference for what happened to you. But regardless, we knew that your brother, the Prince Nikos, was making a move of some sort of coup, although there were also the creatures leaping from the shadows, as well as I believe you called them Sinkai, the invaders who landed and took control of Orvel. The palace was soon locked off to all but those that King, as he calls himself, Nikos, and his Sinkai handlers deemed necessary or worthy. And his face again falls, and he says, I am ashamed to admit to you, Duncan, that several of our people in arms joined with them, saw an opportunity to serve the new Lord of Orvel and his captors, and thus many of our number broke ranks and joined with the very invaders we were sworn to repel. And he kind of gives you a moment in case there's anything you want to jump in with. Also, please feel free to interrupt at any point, otherwise I will just keep blathering.
How many turned?
Many of our number were killed in the initial attack, but I regret to say that there are at least 100 Dawnbreakers still in the employ of Prince Nikos.
I'm sorry, 100?
Yes.
Like 100?
Princess, you may not be aware of how many Dawnbreakers there were.
Like 50 times the number of you two.
And then he pauses and says, well, 2.5 if you count Nibs.
You mean 3.33?
How many Dawnbreakers escaped who remained loyal? He's not even looking at the princess.
Is this Gwendolyn?
I think Ida's just like like looking like, oh, the horror kind of look.
From what I saw before escaping myself, not many Dawnbreakers remain in the city. Several went underground, but I was unable to make contact with many of them. His face falls a bit and he says, I led the remaining 10 that I knew of that I could make contact with in our desperate mission against the palace. Unfortunately, none of them survived the assault. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Once Nikos seized the palace, the nature of Orvel began to change. As you know, many of the nobility are all too easily swayed by who holds the title of the Philosopher King. Thus, when Nikos took the crown for himself, began to issue edicts, many of them simply fell into line, and the city began to change. Orvel is not what it was. Strange building projects began to spring up, as the Sinkai began to work their dark and mysterious magical arts upon the very technology that we held so dear. I'm not sure what the plan was or what they are transforming it into, but these strange structures seem to be more than simple outposts for these invaders. They seem to have some purpose. What it is, sadly, my agents could not determine. All of them that I sent in died. Nevertheless, we knew the only way we could get the nobles back on side was if we could bring the true ruler of Orvel back to the throne. For all of his faults, King Valdrin was the heir to Solaris' legacy, at least in the eyes of many in court. And if we could perhaps free him, we thought maybe we would have a chance. At the very least, we could seek out help in the down low. Perhaps there were others, like... And he kind of like nods to Makka, and he's like, you and your delegation, friend Tortle, who came from Bleen to Orvel, we thought perhaps we too could go and seek out help, as indeed Amalekin Solaris and the Dawnbreakers of old did themselves. Sadly, this plan was not to be. I gathered the 10 remaining Dawnbreakers that I had contact with, and he nods to Nibs and he says, as well as their squires. Together we made contact with the Aeronaut Corps, the few remaining loyalists, and he nods to Jasmeet, who just kind of waves back airily while smoking her pipe. And he says, we found someone on the inside. One of the Dawnbreakers was familiar with Nerman. She was his sister. And Nerman is standing kind of at attention still. He's very much been put in his place by his faux pas with Gwendolyn. So he's like not really registering anything. He is properly kind of disappearing into the background, but you do get the sense that like he's kind of like holding back a lot of pretty big emotions in a very stiff upper lip kind of way. It says, through Carmen Locks, we were able to make contact with Nerman, and with the promise of promotion, he was willing to help us get into the palace. Though many of us have not seen deeply inside, we found the palace much changed. Still gaudy, but in different ways. New technology applied over top of the old. Our plan was simple. Reach the king. Save him. Raid the armory, the treasury, anything we could on our way out. And that is where Jasmeet came in. And Jasmeet kind of like just gives you a little salute. She says, yeah, it's a little known fact amongst the nobility, largely because we're worried what they might do if they find out. But given that Orvel is a flying city, we always had to have some safeguards in place in case anything went real bad. There have been some cases over the years of people trying to escape. You may not have heard of these things. They're kept pretty well under wraps, but it happens more than you'd think. The amount of rope ladders we've had to pull in off the side is, I gotta tell you, it's more than you'd think. So we developed some emergency systems, call them parachutes. They're large, sort of stitched together pieces of fabric attached, and like you can tell she's being very cavalier about it, but like there's a real passion and love to the sort of engineering of flight and other such things that you'd expect from someone who's dedicated their life to it. She says these devices allow us to catch the air if anyone had to jump or was thrown from it, and we aeronauts have a supply. It's a well-kept secret amongst our order. We're sworn to never reveal this, but when Hadrian came to me and said he needed a way off of Orvel with the king, well, you know, I signed up to serve Orvel, not a bunch of weird invaders and some power-tripping asshole kid. Sorry, I know he's your brother. And she kind of turns to you, Gwendolyn, says, I know he's your brother, but he really is a bit of a prick. And,
no, it's fine. He's always been a prick.
Oh, okay.
Even more now. So, like, certainly...
Great.
Yeah, don't.
Yeah, so I didn't sign up to serve that asshole. Kind of thought I'd serve your dad, and then you...
Random question from the side, just because Duncan would know this. Nico, is he older than Gwendolyn or younger than Gwendolyn?
Younger. He was younger. He always had a chip on his shoulder about being not in line for the throne. Gwendolyn was meant to take the... it has been a long time, so just to refresh your memory. When Amala established the philosopher ruler sect, it was very much in that Roman sort of like pre-Marcus Aurelius kind of Augustus forward Roman emperor situation, which was I will adopt the person who is the most reasonable person to succeed me. So rather than it being a bloodline succession, it was an adopting to the family the person who most suited to lead. Unfortunately, a few generations before Gwendolyn and Valdrin, their line came in as one of the philosopher rulers and then just declared it a blood thing. So they shifted away from bringing the best person to rule and made it just a pure sort of bloodline monarchy. As a result, there was a good deal of resentment in some circles towards her line and Valdrin's line, just because, like, a lot of the corruption, Duncan, that you have lived through is a result of it moving to a familial power.
Yeah, bad leadership.
Yeah. In terms of, and I'm sorry, what was your exact
question? Okay, so Gwendolyn would be the rightful heir to the throne. Nico was full of Gwendolyn. Yes. I just wanted to make sure that I had those politics in my head as the conversation was going.
Nico's, his big thing was he got to wield the Elos blade, and would essentially, in like Game of Thrones terms, would essentially kind of end up where Jaime Lannister did, which is like, hey, you're like, you're not a Dawnbreaker because you have to be elevated above that. And again, by this point, the Dawnbreakers being, in a lot of ways, glorified royal guard. The title of Dawnbreaker used to mean a lot, but now that there's so many, it's kind of like, you're one of many heroes. So he would have had kind of like a, protector of the queen type job, like basically like captain of the royal guard kind of situation.
A champion, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you would remember him from your time in court as being very bratty. Big chip on his shoulder about not being in line, but also, unfortunately, one of those kids who's like, we need you to feel important, so we're going to give you this vaunted blade with a lot of history, and then just almost him using it as like a swinging dick to carry around, just really, really flaunting it. He was, in a lot of ways, like, he's almost the template for your Gwendolyn fears. Even though she was older, like, the fear was always like Valdrin isn't great. And so far, Gwendolyn is good. Nikos is awful. So if I don't intercede, the odds of her eventually turning out awful are actually very, very high. She just happens to have some innate kindness and goodness and sense that you don't see anywhere else in the line. And then, of course, they cut you out of the picture and she absorbed more of that than you'd intended. But Nikos, you would have taken Nikos as probably a lost cause. Like, very much in, again, Game of Thrones terms, like, set him to the wall. There's nothing else you can do with this asshole. He's just like a spoiled rich kid who's mad that he doesn't get to be king. Cool. And thus his betrayal of Gwendolyn during the fall of Orville was not entirely out of character. Like, it wasn't like, oh my god, he's up till now, he's been amazing. Like, it wasn't like a Kylo, like a Ben Solo thing where it's like, no, but he's been so good up to this point. Then he turned bad. It's like, no, the bad kid went bad. Who knew? Yeah. So that would be your context on that. Also, a lot of what Hadrian is saying would ring true simply because you know how the nobility works. They already didn't like Valdrin, but again, he had a bit of that like Phil Hartman charm. Like, no one would follow Nikos into a house full of gold. If you're like, there's gold in this house and it's free, no one would be like, fuck yeah, let's go. From your experience,
so he's kind of one of the, we could say, Kim Jong-un type leaders, where you're just like, you exist and you're scary and you're powerful, yeah, kind of petty.
And to the Kim Jong-un point, it would really be like, oh man, like, your father really keeps a close hand on court, and then it's like, oh, it's you now. Oh, leading to things like, I blew up my uncle with an anti-aircraft gun, like stuff like that, where you're just like, oh no. So yeah, it's
he'll be a shit king, yeah.
But actually, what's good though about this, at least from what you're hearing, is that the reaction to him is roughly what you would have hoped it would be, which is that some of the most sycophantic nobility would fall in line immediately, but a bunch of them were like still following him and still doing, but didn't like immediately go, oh, hooray, like meet the new boss, same as the old boss. And honestly, this tracks with Nerman. Like, Nerman should theoretically have just immediately switched camps and been fine with it. But clearly, even he, as like a sycophant amongst sycophants, was like, I think I could do better. So
cool.
Yes. So the assault on the palace, Hadrian goes on to explain, he gathered up the 10 remaining loyalist Dawnbreakers he could find. again, you can think of this almost as like an Order 66 situation from Star Wars, where there are other Dawnbreakers who went hard underground. But similar to you, Duncan, some of them just had skill sets that would allow them to do that, or understood the underbelly of Orville, or just had like other means of disappearing that like the average Dawnbreaker just wouldn't. Like, again, if we think in Jedi terms, it's like the Jedi who just like shows up on time every day and is like, I just like being a Jedi. Like, they're getting killed. But like the one who's like, oh yeah, I had a sordid affair that one time. Oh, cool, I know how to disappear. I'll just like shave my beard and get a gun.
The one who'd had to go undercover with the Mafia is like, well, the Mafia's still the Mafia because tyrants fucking hate crime.
Yeah, good thing I never got rid of my tattoos. All right, like yes, exactly right. So Hadrian took his remaining crew, enlisted Jasmeet and a few of the other aeronauts to secure parachutes as a way out if needed. Obviously, Hadrian's main goal was to retake the palace, bust out Valdrin, take back the palace, and then basically challenge the people of Orville to rise up against the Sinkai occupation, even though technically Nikos is considered the king of Orville right now. It's very clearly an occupied, it's like being the president of France under Hitler. It's like, cool.
Right.
Got a lot of power there, huh, champ? It's like, yeah, a little bit. Got a desk. Right. So that was his plan. Now, Duncan, this sounds like a bullshit plan to you. The storming the castle thing, absolutely Dawnbreaker stuff. Of course they tried that. But the idea that the people of Orville would rise up is, I think, an upsettingly naive...
well, that's some of the dumbest shit he's ever heard.
But it is honestly exactly what you would expect from like a quote-quote good Dawnbreaker, which is... No, the people will follow the cause. Like, this is because that's what he's always done. But you've seen the people of Orville. You know how corrupt it is, and you know that there's not much spine to be had.
Yeah, the cause sucks.
Yeah. So this all reads as true, but also hopelessly naive in the way that led you to kind of forge your own path. Makka, I'm imagining you wouldn't really have much you'd want to throw in on this. This is all like useful context, but also storming palaces and underground resistances and all that sort of stuff really isn't your bag. What do you think Makka's reaction to all this sort of stuff is?
I think he's listening. I think he knows that he's not really being spoken to right now. But he understands that this is very important to Duncan and Gwendolyn. And he knows that, Orville is his ultimate destination right now, where he's got to get that pure, untainted Glamora. Mm-hmm. And so listening to the current state of affairs in Orville would be, important to him.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Makka, the one thing I will tag for you, though, based on that response and what's going on in your head is Haldren has mentioned raiding the treasury and the vault. So there is a non-zero chance. You think it's a slim chance, but he may have information for you about the Glomera sample, given that he has been in there. He may not, but it's, I think, if there is anything to kind of flag as something that you might be waiting to ask about, that would I would probably flag it at that. And Ita, I assume you're kind of in the same boat?
Yeah. Yeah. There's nothing that's really tweaking Ita. I mean, she wasn't there. She doesn't know. It's like she doesn't know if any of this makes sense. She's like, oh, right. Okay. And there's nothing really pertains to her. So cool. She's just taking it all in, doing her mental calculations, putting together all the information, fitting it inside her view of the universe. So there you go.
Cool. Like that a lot. Great. So the day of the assault came. Hadrian describes it, Duncan, in honestly, like tactically, it's a sound approach for a pretty bad, like it's a bad proposition. It is some classic musketeer shit. Like, we have to get the man of the Iron Mask out. This isn't going to be pretty. There's not a lot of options, but we do have to do it. So, it sounds as though, generally speaking, the assault went as well as it could have, all things considered. Nerman was able to sneak them in through a servant's entrance. They were able to kind of make their way through some of the lesser used parts of the palace. The nice thing tactically about Nikos being king is that he was never trained to be king and thus doesn't really have access to all the secrets of Orville. Like Gwendolyn had access to a lot, and also Gwendolyn read. Nikos did not read. So there were a lot of parts of the palace that under the Sinkai occupation aren't really being used. They aren't useful to anything they're trying to do. Nikos doesn't really know or care about them. So as a result, they were able to actually penetrate deep into the palace without raising any alarms. Where things went bad, Hadrian describes, is when they reached King Valderan's chambers. So he continues, having already succeeded in ways we couldn't have possibly hoped to, I must admit I felt my own heart soar when we reached the chambers of the king. Nikos had retained his own chambers, transforming them into his own special spot, as he referred to it once or twice. However, King Valderan, king now in name only, remained in his chambers. We were shocked to find no guards posted, which was alarming but tracked with what Nerman had informed us of. I myself entered first, knowing that due to the recent deaths in the Dawnbreaker ranks, I held a title that he might respond to correctly, or well. We found a stinking, fetid room. The walls, the floors, the bed, the sofas, all the space he had in his chambers was soiled, destroyed, torn apart, not by Sinkai blades, but by the king's own hand. We found Valderan himself, sitting in a small, cleared space, surrounded by burnt pages of what I know not. His beard had grown long, and his royal vestments were nowhere to be found. He wore a simple sleeping cloak, soiled as the rest of the room was, unwashed. This was not the man I knew, nor the one that could lead us to victory. I sincerely hoped that, and I must admit this is a mark against my honor, I hoped that he had merely been injured or tormented such that he had entered this pitiful state. But when I greeted him, he rose, quietly, solemnly, and turned to me. His face was impossibly red from tears, long tracts through the filth down either side. It would seem as though he'd been crying for weeks. I extended my hand to him and asked him to come with us. I explained our mission, our plan. And he stared at me as if I was speaking a foreign language, as though I was something he had never thought of or could conceive of before. Strangest of all, in his eyes I saw pity, a deep, resounding pity that I cannot properly account for. He spoke in a deep, hoarse voice, as though he hadn't spoken aloud in some time, and simply told me that he had seen too much, and that the affairs of this world no longer concerned him. It was then I heard the cries of my fellow Dawnbreakers being cut down in the hall outside. It would seem the Sinkai had trapped the door with some sort of alarm rune or some other magical bullshit that we were unaware of. Nerman, he sort of glares at Nerman and said, being an under-butler, had no knowledge of this particular wing of the palace, and sadly we were exposed. I tried to drag the king, but he screamed in my face with a primal, animalistic rage and pushed me away. And he kind of gestures to his face, and he does have sort of like scabbed over claw marks down one of his cheeks. And he says, all he said as I left the room was, if you knew what I knew, you would not try. You would lay down and let them kill you. But that is not the way of the Dawnbreakers. And so, me and my remaining brethren fought our way out of that hall. Carmen fell, as did several of our rank, before we even reached the armory. We found it empty. Every single blade, weapon, gun, gone. Which leads me to believe the worst of what we will find when at last we face the Sinkai in battle. The treasury and the vault, on the other hand, remained full. We grabbed what we could, which was admittedly not much, knowing we would need things to barter with once we reached the down low. Grabbing what we could, we made our way to the emergency exit, the one that only the king himself and the aeronauts knew of. Jasmeet's companions were killed in our flight, and sadly, the fire from the Sinkai above destroyed several of the chutes, and a few of our Dawnbreakers fell from the sky like comets. We landed amidst some heavy trees, a dense forest, far, far from any of the geography that our books speak of. Duncan, I don't know how you have found the terrain here, but it would seem that our cartographers were hopelessly out of date in their work. We had no idea where we were, no idea where Orvel had drifted to, but we knew we were safe, for the time being at least. And we knew that we needed to seek out help if we were to reclaim the city. King or no king, Orvel must be free. And so, we set out in search of allies. We found Fallow Ted, and Fallow Ted just like wakes up with a start, and like having clearly slept through most of the story, and just kind of like says, "Hey, yeah, me." And they said, luckily he has a penchant for fine art, so we were able to trade him some trinkets we lifted from the armory. He's offered to provide us with muscle on our journey. And it was on the second night, when we admitted that we were exiles from our own land, that the dreams came. None of us spoke of them at first, not trusting to the visions, but one by one we admitted that we had seen the same, with, as I've mentioned, the notable exception of Mr. Locks. And Ted says, and me. I'm not an exile. I'm just a mercenary. I'm just traveling around. So, no visions. Just, making a life on the road. Life on the road. And they're like, yeah, thank you, Fallow Ted. Soon enough, we started to find signs of this tree we had seen, and we knew that we must seek it out. It calls to us, and though I am hesitant to reveal ourselves to it without further investigation and further reconnaissance, it does seem that this is our best chance to find some allies down here. And then for the first time, he legitimately smiles, and it's a tired smile, but it's a big smile. He says, "That is, of course, until we met you."
Well, this is quite the story. So, Princess, officially, the king has abdicated his role by refusing to fight or defend the people or flee. And Nico has taken the crown by illegal coup, which makes you the rightful ruler of Orvel. Also, the princess started an alliance of equals with a number of the lords of Byproduct and elsewhere, so there are allies in this fight of some kind, but the end result of the battles to come and what those allies will require in recompense is unknown. Also, did you mention you'd been to the treasury? Do you have anything from there? If so, Makka really needs to look through what you've got. There's sort of a huge thing going on in Total World where they need to sort out a thing with a god.
A god?
It affects not just the Turtles, but all of us. Everyone in, on, and above Grin.
And he kind of gives a nod, and then he turns to you, Duncan, and says, "Duncan, could I speak to you privately?"
Yes, of course. Of course. Tortle, do you want to just go, Makka, do you want to go look through their business?
And he holds up a hand and says, before we share the spoils of the treasury, I would request a word.
All right, let's pause on that one, Makka. Stay where you are. I'm going to go find out what's going on. And yeah, Duncan will follow Hadrian a ways away from the group.
Cool. So he says, your friend, the turtle, does he serve the government of Bleen?
I don't want to overwhelm you, but I also don't feel the need to lie to you or cushion this. The entire culture of Bleen has been overtaken by a goddess filling them with black goo and turning them to evil. As far as I can tell, Makka is the only turtle with any individual control over themselves.
This is concerning.
I agree.
I ask because Presidentia Umos lives and serves at the hand of Nikos. I suspect she intends to bring Bleen under the power of the Sinkai.
Well, Makka worships what could be referred to as the cycle, which is life and death. You die, you rot, become one with the world creates new life, that kind of thing. The Sinkai coming from outside of that cycle are blasphemy to him, and what his people have done to his goddess caused their fall. It's going to be hard for us to find someone who hates that Presidentia and the Sinkai more than anyone else, and I include you and I in this scenario, so I would consider him as loyal as one could have a friend.
He just kind of nods at you and he turns around and says, Friend Turtle, you may look through the cart. Then he nods and says, thank you, Duncan. I wouldn't want to admit this in front of the others, but I have felt tremendously lost without my fellow Dawnbreakers. It is good to be amongst friends once again.
Yes.
You want to roll an insight check there, sir?
Yes. That is a 7.
Is it though? He nods to you and he not is it a 7, but is it good to be back amongst friends? You don't know. You rolled a 7. He nods to you and makes his way back towards the fire. So Makka, you have access to the cart. Nerman kind of like looks on suspiciously in that weird like don't touch other people's luggage kind of way. Like my job is to take care of the luggage and don't touch the luggage. How do you think you would look for the untainted Glomra?
Is it something that I can sense?
I think you could try. That's mostly why I ask. Like, I feel like, given that it's like a part of the cycle, you wouldn't just like be like looting through your giant turtle paws.
I mean,
Gwendolyn would offer like the gem of seeing if it helped.
You have used the last charge.
Oh shit! I did. Right. Never mind.
And
we offer you this useless
rambled on for more than 10 minutes. So.
I would start with trying to see if I can sort of detect it through the cluster if it's in close proximity.
Okay, so go ahead. We've been using wisdom for this, I believe. Has it been insight for you? I'm sorry, I ask you this every fucking time.
That's okay. I feel like I change my answer every time, too, so it's okay. It's not Arcana. We don't do Arcana. Sometimes it's nature, sometimes it's religion. They're both int-based, so it's kind of...
Can it be a will save? Okay, well, go with the one you think would be most appropriate for this particular action on
I would say
part.
Nature over religion, since it's not...
I'll buy that. You're specifically reaching for the cluster.
Of Jossie.
Yeah.
It's not a bad roll. That's going to total 18.
18. All right, yeah, solid. You can sense it's I will tell you straight up, it's not in the cart. Because Princess is always in another castle. But you get a almost a resonant like
trace amounts.
Yeah, trace amounts. Yeah. like just a hint of it, a soupçon, if you will, which is really nice. It is like the first breath of fresh air you've had in a long time. And so I think you just have a moment of truly sitting in that and just like after just, like shit upon shit upon shit, to just actually have just that one like moment, fleeting as it is, of, the smell of home and of the cycle operating the way it should. Unfortunately, with that moment comes the realization that if you can smell it, if you can sense it, then it's not fully contained wherever it is. Now, admittedly, if you can still sense it on things they stole not that long ago, because they've been wandering for a little under a week, so like 6 days. So it's not like, oh God, that was the last trace, but the fact that as of 6 days ago it was leaking is not a great sign. It's a good sign that it's still there and that there's still some of it to leak. You also don't know how much of it there was to begin with, all that sort of stuff. But it adds just a little edge of urgency to the idea of like, this may not be a fully contained, I can get to it when I get to it thing.
Yeah.
That said, the brief moment of relief is still palpable, and I think after everything you just went through with Jossie, this combined with the ability to still summon the powers of Jossie does give you legitimate hope for being able to turn this thing around. So I'm going to give you 1 point of inspiration.
Oh, thank you.
Because you are finally feeling your total self.
If I had questions for, I just checked his name and forgot it already.
Adrian?
Nerman. If I had questions for Nerman, would I be able to ask them now?
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
Makka turns to Nerman, who's been, observing him and who has clearly kind of demonstrated a sort of authority over these items regarding the ancient urn and things like that and tidying all that up. And Makka will say,
is this the entirety of the items you took from Orville's treasury?
And he nods and says, the captain had managed to obtain a few more. Unfortunately, we lost, as he said, some of the dawn breakers in our flight. They were carrying goods as well. We managed to find the bodies, but most of the goods they were carrying were destroyed upon impact. Not unlike ancient urns in the hands of idiots. He looks at Nibs, who just kind of cowers.
So this means that the Glamora could potentially have plummeted to Earth.
It's possible.
Okay, that's troubling.
But they did find the wreckage, so he would be able to identify. He would likely be able to identify it for you if that were the case.
So I'm using kind of extra sensory abilities provided by the cluster to detect the presence of the Glamora. Does it leave any kind of physical trace, something that I can show to the butler to say, I'm looking for something like this?
The spores themselves kind of are the most physical representation. The Glamora itself is almost too metaphysically building blocky of that.
Okay.
But I mean, I'd let you roll to see if you could accurately depict it to him, to confirm or deny.
All right. What kind of roll are you looking for, sir?
I'd say nature again. This
nature?
Is you just describing.
12.
12. Okay. You confuse the hell out of him with all the talk of Glamora. This isn't a term anyone uses. You guys only learned it a couple weeks ago in game time. But in describing a delicate jar situation or something held within, he kind of shakes his head and he says, the captain was very clear in his instructions that we were only to grab the most tangible and practical things, nothing that would require any mystical knowledge or separate abilities to unlock or make useful. We grabbed things we knew had tremendous value, but also things that would hopefully have value to And he kind of like looks at you, and he looks at the gnome, and he kind of says, to the other creatures of the down low, things that would be immediately attractive to other minds.
And from the surface of Gren, where you landed, you could see Orville in the sky, yes?
For a time, it disappeared not
Where?
long after we fell. And you can see his patience started to wear a bit thin. He said, beyond the treetops, we were in a forest.
Point.
He just like throws up his arms and points kind of like back a bit further, like up and away to the where would that be? West.
West? Yeah.
West? Okay. Makka nods and says,
Thank you.
and he'll walk back to the group and not sit down again, but kind of be ready to go. And we'll say to, like, if Gwendolyn, Ita, or if Duncan's back kind of thing, if they're not immediately engaged in anything, he'll say,
Duncan would circle back. So I think you could say Duncan would be there because he talked to Hadrian. So he'd be circling back as you came out of your search.
Gwendolyn's just been kind of pondering what Hadrian had said.
Makka will say,
I have found trace amounts of the untainted Glamora on the contents of the cart. It is no longer contained and may be snuffed out if it is not seen to in short order. My best guess is that it remains on Orville. That way.
and he'll point to where the butler pointed, and we'll say,
time, more so than ever, is of the essence. We must be on our way.
Do you currently have a way to get us up to Orville, Sire Tortle?
Some of us, yes. Through animal conjuring and such, yes.
At the same time, we need friends, we need allies. There are those that can be found in the city, but
I
we're short on
cannot
people.
bring an army to Orville.
No, but perhaps some of these exiles could. We do not know. I'm thinking I can talk to Nibs. He seems like the kind of person who, A, means well, and B, he looks over and almost feels bad to say it. Like, everybody else is far enough away. He's like, I don't actually think he's capable of lying. And to him, that feels like it's beating up on a little kid. To the rest of you, this is probably a totally fine statement, but he just doesn't want to have anything bad to say about Nibs. And he's like, I could find out how close they feel they are from these dreams, because it said they have an accurate idea of location.
Look, I mean, Duncan, I'm sorry, but I have to bring this up. Like, one of the first things that you taught me when we left Orville was don't make decisions based on dreams. So does that stand here, or we taking dreams into consideration now, or is it a depends kind of situation?
What I would say is you should not make plans based on dreams. That's one we can just stand by as a hardcore rule. But we've got a collection of people who appear to be magically influenced in some way to find other people who are being exiled. I think if that's happening, and it's within a day, it might be worth going to just see who shows up. It could be the Senkai, it could be an evil we're familiar with, it could turn out to be the root folk, and this could be Jasi influenced, which would be eminently useful for us to understand. If we've got to follow these people for a month, I mean, I'm the first one to say, A, order the Dawnbreakers to go with us, and kind of fuck the dreams. But if it's close, there may be value. The one thing we don't have is any way to actually track Orville or effectively get our allies from Byproduct or other areas up there to be able to help us. We need that.
And Hadrian will chime in, having kind of given you some polite. Have you guys been talking about this in secret, or just?
I think the first
would
part
not be making a secret of it. He just
Sure.
isn't capable of that kind of discretion.
Understood. So Hadrian will say, what Duncan Danno says is true. The defenses of Orville have been somewhat upgraded since the last time you would have seen it, Princess. The Xingkai weapons are highly advanced, highly deadly. They have already found ways to turn our armory's guns into something much more accurate and deadly. They don't seem to bring with them any ranged weapons themselves, but the way they've managed to adapt ours has already been quite disturbing. Friend Turtle, if we were to attempt to fly up there and...
it's Turtle. You said Turtle.
You will forgive me. We come from a somewhat smaller and less educated place than I suspect you, friend Turtle, or you, friend Orc. If we attempt to make it up to Orville in our current state, even with your animal assistance, my fear is that we would not make it as far as the edge of the city itself, let alone to actually land on it safely. You've mentioned that you are concerned about something in the armory. What do you seek?
The untainted Glamora. It is the key to reversing this curse that has struck the land and has tainted my people entirely.
Is it like the spores that seem to cover you?
Yes. Yes.
He kind of nods, and he reaches into his his pouch, and he pulls out a blade that has a sort of a grayish powder on it. He's wrapped it, so he unwraps it and he says, I do not know that this will be of assistance to you in your quest, but as we battled our way through the treasury, I found a strange substance that seemed to be growing across some corner of it. As I ran by, I managed to capture a bit of it in the hopes of being able to study it or perhaps show it to someone down here. It would seem you are that someone. And he'll hand you the blade. This looks to you, Makka, like... it looks like your spores, but it looks like inactive spores, like spores that have just been either exposed or have kind of run their course. But although you can't pull anything off it, this does seem to give you hope that there may be a leak, but the leak may not be... The leak is a problem, but it may not be like if we don't solve this in 2 minutes, we're fucked kind of problem. That said, the fact that the Glamora is spreading is also strange, and you're not quite sure what to make of that.
Okay. One thing I've been curious about, Tom, it's a little bit kind of changing up what we've been talking about, but based on the description provided of this dream, this Exiles moon, this woman, and just what I, a native of Gren, know, does that sound like anything I've ever heard of? A tree full of ornamentation that's been like marked on like a farmer's fence and things like that. Like, have I seen that symbol ever or heard of anything like that?
You roll me a... I think I'll say insight, please. Or history if you got history.
I got history. I mean, I got it all. I rolled it too. It doesn't matter. So yeah,
no.
Total is...
No, Tyler.
I rolled athletics.
Yeah. Survival. Yeah. No, it isn't something you've heard of, but actually that doesn't... The fact that there's a woman mentioned and the moon is odd to you because that sounds vaguely Jossie-esque. However, you also didn't really, in your kind of unlife post being stabbed, you didn't really leave...
That's true.
Lean,
yep.
And you also didn't really talk to people about things outside of the cycle. Like people wouldn't show up and be like, "Hey, welcome to Makka's. Like, let me hook you up with some potions."
What's the scuttlebutt?
Yeah, exactly. No. Like, hail, traveler, tell me of your adventures.
Yeah.
So I think you don't know, but it also wouldn't. It would. I don't think it would alarm you that you haven't heard of this,
right?
Except that, again, anytime Moon and Mysterious Woman are in the same line, it always, you know.
I know a moon and a woman.
Yeah, it raises that, like, you know, NSA flag anytime anyone says something on the phone they shouldn't.
Okay. Then, sorry, that was something that I was thinking about.
No. Thank you. I'm glad you brought it up.
Address. Regarding this blade that he's handed me, is this a weapon of some kind?
Yeah, you can tell it's a throwing dagger. So think like almost the Japanese style, like small no hilt, just the finger loop,
like a kunai. Then I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you get the sense that either he threw it and recovered it, or he just scraped it as it went by. But
okay,
that it seemed curious enough that he wanted it.
Okay. And the spores are inert?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't have speak with plants. Tomorrow, we'll ask the dagger tomorrow. But okay, we'll take the dagger from him and say,
I would like to keep this, if I may, Hadrian.
Of course. My hope was that it would be of some use to someone. It is of no use to me. I hope it provides some of the answers you and your people need.
It provides some reassurance, and perhaps it will yield more in the coming days. Thank you.
I hope so too. You are most welcome. And then he kind of looks to the moon, and there's a pretty decent cloud cover, so you're not sort of seeing the moon constantly, but it is nearing a full moon. And he says, the visions have indicated that we must make it to the tree by the full moon in order to reach this gathering of exiles. It would seem that tomorrow night will be the day. Night, evening, these visions confuse me. We must arrive there soon. I would ask you to join us, but, Princess, I believe that choice is up to you.
Right. Well, I mean, show of hands, I suppose. Can we do that? Who wants? Everyone want to go?
Duncan rolls his
check
eyes
out the
and raises
exile
his hand.
Moon thing. Yes. Okay, only Duncan.
Question?
Do you want to go check out the exile moon thing?
Nibs puts up his hand.
Yes.
Right.
Duncan
okay.
has.
All right.
Congratulations,
let's
Princess.
do that.
That's your first step towards democracy. Obviously, we're resting, I assume, now.
Unless you want to talk to Nibs.
I'm going to go have a quick chat with Nibs, but I'm just going to say, you guys sort out the watch. After our experience with the dwarves, I don't give a fuck where we're sleeping. We're doing watches at all times. We're inside a castle with our very best friend surrounded by an army. I don't give a fuck. One of us is staying up, giving watch all time.
I will take first watch.
And fallow Ted is just like, oh, that's amazing. Good. Proper nap for Ted. Thanks, man.
You are welcome, fallow Ted.
And he's out like a light, just fucking...
Duncan's just going for Nibs. This is them to sort it out.
Right. So you make your way over to Nibs. Nibs is standing respectfully close by with his hand up in the air like an idiot because he thought he was included in the vote. But also he feels happy that he helped democracy. That's pretty good for him. And you approach and he says, sorry, sir, can I help you?
Yes, why don't you take a quick walk with me, Squire? And he'll just head off into the woods because people keep popping up around camp and he wants to actually have a solo chat. So, sure. Nibs, you've done brave things. You've gone beyond what any Dawnbreaker has had to do in at least a century in terms of adventure into the world, bravery, courage. Why haven't you yet taken your oaths?
And he looks at you kind of aghast. And he just says, well, sir, there are still several tests I must pass. I have yet to be officially cleared in the use of firearms or bladed arms. I have passed cudgels and blackjacks, though, so I'm pretty proud of myself for that. But, sir, I'm sure it has been a long time for you since you had to take on your gauntlets and make your oaths. But I have a lot to learn still, and and he kind of looks a little bit bashful, and he's like, I don't want to take the oath until I can live up to it.
That is a grand way to think. But I will tell you, the idea of the oaths and skills and tests, that's become a new tradition in Orville, but the Dawnbreakers of old, there were no tests, there were the oaths, and then there was the truth.
No tests?
You've already established that you would enter a castle to save the king.
Well, yeah.
If you saw a thief attacking a man on the street, would you intervene?
Well, of course. I mean, as I said, I passed blackjacks and cudgels, so if I had one of those, I would hit him with it. But if I didn't, I would attempt to use my body, I guess, to stop the mugging as best I could.
And if that thief had a blade, would you still intervene?
Well, of course. He's a thief.
Interesting. Because in that case, your strength would be protecting the weak. Your wrath would be undoing the wicked. Your love would be defending your friend.
He's like mouthing it along with you.
Your body would be bleeding for the code, and your service would only end when justice took you. Skill doesn't make a Dawnbreaker, the codes do. If you would swear those codes, you've already proven that you're living them.
Okay. I should probably talk to First Captain Hadrian, though, shouldn't I?
You've sworn yourself to service. That is not unreasonable, but I will stand with you as witness.
Okay. And he kind of he goes to turn like dramatically, and then he kind of shies back and says, "Can we do this after the moon?"
That seems perfectly reasonable. There's no pressure to take the oaths. I just wanted to point out that you're worthy.
Oh well, thank you, and I would very much like to, but I think I need to meditate on whose house I would like to be sworn into, as well as which oath speaks most to me. Again, I know it's been a long time since you thought about this, but it's kind of important to choose one that you can actually really stand by. And some of them I like really resonate with, and others I don't. But the problem is like a few of them I think are really good, so I have to pick which one. And honestly, I would hate to fuck that up. Screw that up. I'm sorry.
I say fuck all the time. That's not in the codes. You can swear.
Can swear?
Oh yeah, you can run around with your ass out. It doesn't matter as long as you're standing by the codes.
Sir, I hope you don't take this the wrong way. I really fucking wish you'd been one of my teachers at school.
Honestly, having met you for this short time, I wish the same thing.
And with a kind of like excited grin, he clasps your hand in a warrior way and like looks at your gauntlets and like in awe, because they are the ancient Danno gauntlets that he doesn't really know the significance of. But they look old and cool as fuck.
You have a weapon, friend.
I have. Yes, I do. I have an axe. It was my mentor's before she was killed in the escape.
Well, then allow me to be the first person to contribute to your ongoing collection of blades. And Duncan will reach into his bag and he will pull out a dagger of Crecate, because he's hung onto one through all of these adventures. That's like nice. Twisted and dark and kind of spooky, but also a very effective dagger. And just kind of toss it in the air so it'll spin a couple of times and catch it and extend it hilt forwards and say, I took this from the Shadowlands when we freed it from tyranny. And now it'll ride with you.
He very reverently like wraps his hands around his hand around the blade, and he just says, around the hilt rather, and says, an old friend used to tell me, you never have too many blades. So thank you. When I wield this one in the name of justice, I will think of you. And he's like, oh, cool. I don't know what kind of hilt this thing fits in, though. This is wild.
Yeah, I've had to keep it in a bag.
A bag, of course. It's so simple.
The last thing I want to ask you about is Hadrian. The first captain you're saying he's been promoted to. How has this whole adventure been for him? How's he been reacting? What's it been like since he's gotten to Earth? He just seems different. I remember him.
And Nibs will nod and say, I'm afraid I didn't know too much about him beforehand. Well, I knew of him, of course, and his exploits in keeping Orvel safe, but I didn't know him personally. I suspect he needs a goal, and that's why he's driving us so hard towards this Exiles moon. It's the only thing that's really given us any guidance since we landed down here. He didn't want to leave. I know he said in the story that he left, but we had to pull him from the king's chambers. He begged him to come with us, but we had to drag him out, and it was only after my mentor, she had to hit him in order to snap him out of it. And I think only she was badly wounded at the time, and I think only her pointing out that he was the only one of us left who could actually escape alive was around the time that he clued into it. And he carries those deaths upon him. If you listen carefully at night, you can hear him saying their names. I think he feels the weight of them very heavily. He took to calling himself first captain only because of the sense of betrayal he felt at the others turning. And I think until he met you, he thought he was the last one. At least the last one that we could rely on. He wears all of this very heavily. Whoever he was before, he's haunted, but he's pushing forward, and I respect him. I think he's a good Dawnbreaker, like you.
Thank you, Nibs. I will speak with him tomorrow about what you've shared with me now. But it is best for us to rest, you to meditate, think of your future, make decisions in whatever way you please. And me to stay up, because even when you're inside a dwarf fortress, it'll explode and get attacked by elementals. So I'll keep an eye out for that.
And just kind of with a trembling lip, he's like, elementals? At which point you just like stride off into the night.
Don't worry, we've killed a lot of them, he says over his shoulder as he returns to camp.
Yeah, and he looks down at his blade, and kind of looks up at the sky, and looks at his blade, and goes, oh, I think I'm going to need a bigger sword. With that, with Makka on watch, Fallow Ted snoring contentedly, and the rest of you, you settle in for the night. And although your hearts are heavy and your mind's busy with the concerns of kind of the fate of your various people and the new knowledge you've gained, for one night at least, you're able to relax around a fire and get some actual good sleep.
This episode of Curse Code and Crowd Sound was mixed and edited by Laura Hamstra, and the campaign was created by Tom McGee. Our original theme music was composed by Landon Knoblock, and Curse Code and Crown's artwork was created by the brilliant Borovic. If you want to follow our players or our DM on Twitter, you can reach out to Laura at EL Hamstring, Ryan at the Ryan LaPlante, Tyler at Tyler_Hewitt, Tom McGee at McGeeTD, or you can message our whole company at DumDumDice. So please, join us again for more Curse, Code, and Crown!
Dum-Dums and Dice has to give a special thank you to the supreme beings of our Patreon at this time. The Half-Blind Prophet, Christopher Little, Sue One, George Dolby, Richard Cranium, Sammy Boy, Orion Birchfield, Scott Garland, Benjamin V, Gavin and Abby McDonald, Logan, Fire Unfriendly, Acrix, Grandma Likes D&D, Alan, Austin Nut Powers Fry, Stabby Stranger, Glitch Trick, Roman Brown, and Jill and Noel LaPlante. If you want your name to be added to this list, you can join our Patreon too at patreon.com/dumdumdice. Thanks to them, and a little bit of thanks to you.